Okay, so my name is Justin Klemm. I'm a freelance web developer. I'm based in New York City. I'm really not a QA person or a test engineer, so if I say anything idiotic in regards to testing during this presentation, you guys will have to cut me a little bit of slack. I have, however, become really interested in automated browser testing in the past year or so, and specifically PhantomJS. So this presentation is actually going to be broken into two parts. The first is going to be PhantomJS, CasperJS, and a couple of related tools. That'll take about 20 minutes. The second part is going to be a demo of a product I've been working on called Ghost Inspector that leverages a number of those technologies. That'll take about 10 minutes. I'll take a quick break in between for some questions. So let's start this off here. PhantomJS. What is PhantomJS? So PhantomJS is a headless version of WebKit. You've probably heard of WebKit. It's a really popular browser rendering engine. Chrome used it for a long time. Safari, I believe, still uses it. Lots and lots of browsers use it. What do I mean by headless, though? I mean it's windowless and it's a command line version. So in other words, the window has been pulled out, the toolbar, all the visuals, and this has just been stripped down into a programmable web browser. It's programmable through JavaScript, and it also, at this point, supports WebDriver out of the box. So that's built right in. How do I get it? So really quickly, this is a Node.js package. So you install Node.js. If you don't have it, that's fine. Really easy to install. Just go to the Node.js site. It takes just a couple of minutes. And then you want to do an npm install. So npm is Node Package Manager. That's what we use in Node to install packages. The package is called PhantomJS. The -G in this case just installs it globally so that you can access it anywhere in your system as opposed to like in a specific project. And to do that on a Unix-based system, at least you need to sudo this command. And Windows may have a slightly different procedure, but probably pretty similar. The website is phantomjs.org. So how do I use it? Let's take a look at a really quick example. Here's some JavaScript. Even if you're not used to JavaScript, this should be pretty easy to follow. We have this page variable. We're creating a web page. So essentially firing up this PhantomJS browser. We're opening google.com, and then we have a callback when it's done. And within that callback, we're logging, meaning we're outputting page.content. And then we're exiting, right? Super simple, no testing going on yet. Just accessing the URL and outputting it. What's cool here off the bat is if you've done some programming before and you've downloaded a URL, maybe in PHP or Python, and you've gone out and fetched something from the server, what you get is just the HTML, right? It may be referencing JavaScript and images and other things, but your request isn't going to do that. What's cool about Phantom, because it's a browser, it actually renders all that. So when I'm doing this page.content, I'm getting the actual rendered DOM after Google has loaded. You know, if it's doing dynamic stuff, you know, people use AngularJS these days and lots of pull-in templates dynamically. I'm getting the content after all of that is done. So that's really handy, especially if you're going for kind of a scraping approach or something like that. The way we run this, PhantomJS, and we just pass it this JavaScript file. Pretty simple. What else can I do? So you can inject or execute arbitrary JS code. So JavaScript code. I'm not suggesting you should do this, but you could hypothetically go to some other site, drop in jQuery, start messing with all kinds of stuff on the page. You should hopefully be doing this on your site, but that's available to you. Perform actions. We'll get into this in a little bit, but you're clicking and you're filling out forms and things that you're used to in Selenium can all be done. Take screenshots. Monitor performance. So you have a really low-level access to this browser. You can watch your AJAX requests going in and out. You can watch images being downloaded. So you have access to all that information. So if you're interested in sort of a performance approach, it's a great option. Now, I know this is a test call, so you might be thinking that's nice, but I'm interested in testing. So it's important to note that PhantomJS is not a test framework. It's the browser. So think of it the same way you think of Chrome or Safari or Firefox. It's the actual browser. With that said, there are lots and lots of frameworks available that tie directly into it. A couple here that you may have heard of, Mocha, Karma, Jasmine. There's a lot more on the PhantomJS site. Also, I mentioned this, but WebKit support built in. When you launch this from the command line, you can specify this WebDriver option and send it a port to do your WebDriver stuff. The one I'm going to talk about is CasperJS. excuse me, which is built specifically for Phantom, and I think it's really cool. So CasperJS, what is it? It's an API and a test framework layer on top of PhantomJS. So I mentioned PhantomJS is pretty low-level stuff, and if you're writing tests, you really want to be able to click buttons, fill in forms, do these things that you're used to doing. So it provides all of those for you, the things many of you are probably used to: clicking, typing, waiting a certain amount of time, waiting for an element to show up, assertions, etc. You still have access to all those low-level things like events. You can take screenshots. You can even take screenshots of specific elements. So you can be like, I want to take a screenshot of just this header div, and here's the ID, or this table, and here's a class name, or here's the XPath for something. I just want a screenshot of that, which is cool. So how do you get it? Same deal here. It's a Node.js package. Same thing. It's just called CasperJS. You install it this way. It'll actually install Phantom for you if you do this. And CasperJS.org is the site. It's a great site, really good documentation. So how do I use it? Let's take a look at some Casper code. So a little bit different here. We're creating a Casper object. The Casper object is really just PhantomJS with a wrapper around it, a wrapper that's giving you some nice functions to use. So here you can see I'm starting at google.com. Once it loads, I'm filling in this form. I'm matching the form with a selector here. This form action equals search. And here's my form data. There's an input. The name is Q. So I'm typing in ghost into that input. I could submit that form. I'm getting fancy here, and I'm clicking the button using the CSS ID. And then there's this concept of then. So once that form is submitted, then I'm going to echo, meaning output, the meta title of the page here. And here's where I actually kick off the running of this script. So pretty basic stuff. And if you're used to writing tests, with Selenium or whatever kind of platform you use, this should look pretty familiar. The way you run this, really similar. You're just using the CasperJS binary this time. You're passing it your script. Let's look at another example. So Casper really has two, let me hide this for a sec. Casper really has two modes. There's sort of this general browser mode, right? Maybe you're scraping, maybe you're taking screenshots, just doing generic things. And then there's this idea of a test mode, which is really geared around making assertions and a pass-fail kind of mentality. And that gives you access to all those assertion functions. So we create this Casper object again, and this time we're using this test object. We're beginning the test. If you're not a JavaScript person, this may look a little bit scary to you because the JavaScript's kind of callback craziness, but basically, Google tests, we're starting on google.com, and all I'm doing is going to google.com, and I'm asserting the title matches Google. I run the test, and then I say it's done. So if you run this in your console, you get all that nice output that's like green or red with the check marks and all that kind of nice stuff you're used to. The way I run this, I just add this extra test option to my command when I run it, and that kind of boots up Casper in test mode. Let's talk about some advantages, rather, of PhantomJS. High speed, low resources, right? This is just a really small binary that has a lot of power and doesn't take up much resources. You can run it locally. If you have a suite of 10 tests, you could run them all concurrently locally on your machine, rip through them in a couple of seconds, and it's really not going to impact your machine. So probably not much resources than just a browser tab. So what's nice is that, Sauce Labs is great, right? And you can go out and you have this big ecosystem, but relatively speaking, that's kind of costly. Like you're going out to a third-party service over the internet, so you have to be connected, then you're booting up a VM and loading up this browser, and then you're shutting it back down and all that stuff. So obviously that's going to be necessary at some point, but for starters, you can avoid that. You can rip through tests really quickly. Self-contained command line application. And so you don't have to worry about cookies and cache and sessions. If you're testing locally and you boot up, say, Chrome and run through a test, like maybe you're logged into a site, and you have some cookies or cache, things that may interfere with that. You don't have to worry about any of that with Phantom unless you want to. You can actually turn those things on, but you can avoid it off the bat, which is nice. Disadvantages of using Casper. The biggest by far, lack of ecosystem, right? You get one version of WebKit, and that's it, and it's not even the latest. So I don't know exactly what version it is. It's a bit older, I think, and then they're working on Phantom 2.0 that's going to use a newer version. But even still, right, I think Chrome at this point uses Blink. You've got Firefox with Gecko. You've got Internet Explorer. So you're really only testing on one browser. So what that means, at least in my opinion, is that Phantom is a really good option for smoke testing. It has a really capable JavaScript engine, but maybe not comprehensive testing. Now, like I said, I'm not a test engineer. I don't know if there's different terms that are used, but what I mean by that is that it makes a really good first round of defense, right? Testing the core functionality of your site or your application, do the form submit, do the links work, can I log in, can I log out? Does my vanilla JavaScript that I expect to behave, across all of my browsers, does that stuff work? Have I broken anything catastrophically? And then, if it makes that hurdle, then you can go off and run it on, say, when you were like, I want to run this on Internet Explorer 9 and Windows 7, then you can go off and, use those other options. So how do we solve this problem, right? How do we introduce more of an ecosystem? Maybe headless versions of other browsers. Wouldn't it be cool if locally you could rip through not just some older version of WebKit, but maybe Blink or Gecko or Internet Explorer. So there's actually a lot of work underway already. There's one that's really cool called SlimerJS, and it's a pretty mature package. It uses the Gecko engine, which is the Firefox engine, and it's already supported by Casper, which is really great. So if you write your test in CasperJS, by default, it'll use Phantom. But you can pass in an option to say, I want to use CasperJS, and it'll run it in Gecko. And this will actually use the latest version of Gecko. So if you have Firefox installed, it'll use that. You can also use a separate version or an older version. So some cool options there. I will say it has a little more work to go. I don't think it's entirely headless yet. So when I used it, it did pop up a window, not like a full-on Firefox window that had all my settings and everything, but just a little window really quickly. But pretty active project. Another one, Trifle.js, Internet Explorer. Is it for real? I don't know. I think so. There's like a website and it looks pretty nice. I haven't messed with it, but it seems like a legitimate project that's being worked on, and that would be really exciting. Probably only like a Windows-only thing, but could be really useful. Okay, let's move beyond browsers for a second. I'm going to take a sip of water 1 minute. So let's talk about visual regressions. I've done a little bit of work on this, and I thought it'd be cool to throw it in the presentation. So imagine a scenario here, which many of you have probably come across. A developer like me botches the style sheet, right? We add some extra styles, and they overlap something, or we move some styles. Something happens, and what you end up with is a page that works, but is visually broken. Maybe it's a login form, and the form is there. You can throw your email and password into it, hit submit, and it'll log you in. But it looks really terrible, and that's a problem for the user. So how do we catch this, right? This isn't as simple as pass-fail because the page works. And the thing is, it's really kind of up to interpretation, like whether this page is broken or not, right? You have to have somebody who knows what this page is supposed to look like. And that's really hard. But a good start might be at least awareness that things are changing. So Phantom and Casper have these really nice options for taking screenshots. And they're automated, so why not try to feed that into some automated method for detecting changes? So the way I've tackled this is with a tool called ImageMagick. If you're a developer, you've probably heard of this tool or used it. It's pretty common for resizing images and avatars and all that. But what's really cool, and I didn't know this till recently, is that it comes with this compare tool for diffing images. So you can pass in 2 images, and there's lots of different modes and options. You can do like a binary compare, like, is this image different? Yes or no, right? Is any pixel different? You can do a percentage compare, like what percentage of change, exists between these 2 images? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? And then you can even spit out a visual representation showing you the changes, highlighting what's changed. So let's take a look at an example here. Here's my nice, pretty form. I've got like a blue login button. I'm using a nice font and all that. And here's my broken form. I will admit this is kind of a contrived example that I created in Photoshop, but you've probably seen something similar to this, right? This button down here has lost some of the styling and defaulted back to the default button look. I don't know if you can see this on the webcast, but this font is back to good old Times New Roman over here, and up here it's something nice like Roboto. But just note that these login boxes are the same, right? They haven't changed. This forgot password is the same. So here's my ImageMagick command. I'm using this compare tool. This RMSE is the sort of the algorithm. You have a lot of options and things you can add in here. Here's my form1.ping, here's my form2, and here's where the output goes. You can see it spits out this number. So in the parentheses, that 0.0889 is 8.89% change. And here is what the diff looks like. You can see here where the fonts have changed. There's some red. It shows the two buttons. But these inputs that haven't changed, they've just been faded out. That may even be tough to see. They are there. So does this tell me whether something is broken? No, but at least it gives me some idea, and if I know something about my site, if I know that maybe there's some flux because there's some banners and whatnot, but anything over 5% is maybe out of the ordinary, maybe I can script this, and you'll see this when I do this Ghost Inspector demo. Maybe you could say, if it's more than a 5% change or 10% change, I want to at least know about it so I can do this manual review and see, is this visual change supposed to happen, or is that breakage? There's actually a lot of work I've found being done on this kind of thing. A couple of options here. PhantomJS is one that, PhantomCSS is one that I believe ties right into PhantomJS. Huxley is one that's actually being worked on by Facebook. So I imagine some resources and effort going into that. There's one called Wraith by the BBC News people. So same thing, probably some research going into that. There's one I've seen called Hardy. I don't actually think this is screenshot-based. I think they do style-based assertions. So basically you say like, this button is supposed to be blue, or like this text is supposed to be black, which is kind of an interesting approach. There's one, I think this one is super new, but I happened to see it on Twitter and it looked pretty cool, SiteEffect.io. And I think what this person is doing is they're actually leveraging the screenshot and the DOM. So what happens with the screenshot comparison is if somebody adds 20 pixels to the top of the page and shifts everything down, it's going to throw everything off, right? There's going to be a huge amount of change in your screenshots. And so white space can have that effect. So this person, I think, is kind of doing like snapshots of like individual elements and comparing those to kind of negate this white space offset thing, which I think is really cool. So, okay, that's part one of the presentation. So if anybody at this point like wants to chime in on PhantomJS, CasperJS, any of the stuff we talked about, feel free. Also feel free to type it into the chat. But I'll take just a second here. I'm going to pause and have some water. And the demo is going to take about 10 minutes. You can see some of the stuff in action. And then afterwards, I'll try to answer more questions. That's one question here for the screenshot diffs. Do any of the tools allow you to mask out sections so as not to add effects to your diff percentage? Yeah, that's a great question. So that's sort of something I've grappled with. There are ways to mitigate that kind of thing. That compare function I showed for ImageMagick is powerful, but I really think that's kind of the name of the game right now. Like if things are being shifted around, how do you catch that? I would say mess around with it. Some of these packages are starting to get pretty advanced. There may be a masking feature in that compare tool. It's pretty powerful. I would just look up ImageMagick compare and it shows you the API and all the options. So maybe you can take a look and look into those frameworks because those will tie in really neatly. Another question here, how does this work with Mocha and other frameworks? I really don't know. I haven't tied this into like a specific framework. I'm thinking that some of that Huxley stuff and the Wraith is able to tie into that. Obviously you want kind of like a nice workflow where it's going to run these tests and feed your screenshots through and not have to worry about any of that. As far as how these tie into each other really nicely, I'm sure there's some people out there who are working on that, but I think this stuff is pretty new, so I would Google for it and mess around. So I don't have a great answer to the Mocha question. Okay, so I'm going to flip over here. So I'm going to show now this project called Ghost Inspector. So just to give you a little bit of background on this project, I'm a freelance developer, right? So I get to work with lots of different companies and lots of different positions. usually on the smaller side. And I almost never see automated browser testing being used. And sometimes it's that they don't have the QA expertise or maybe the QA resources, or they don't have QA at all. And that's obviously part of it. But I think some of it, and from what I've seen, was just that it's kind of a high hurdle to get into this stuff. It's not super easy. It takes some expertise. You have to learn about the software and learn Selenium and coding tests, and tying into Sauce Labs and your continuous integration system and all these things, which I should mention, if you're a test engineer, is totally worth learning. But a lot of these companies just aren't in that position. So for me, it was like, how do I create a system that can get these companies into the game really quickly in a matter of minutes, but not throw like testing principles out the window, and the power and flexibility and durability of these tests. So this is kind of my attempt at that. I'm going to log in here real quick. So here I'm logged in. I get this test suite screen. We're going to create a couple of sample tests here. So I'll create a test suite called samples. Now with this system, you have two methods for creating tests. You can record them with this Chrome extension that works a lot like Selenium IDE that I built. And I'll show that in a second, but I'm going to create a test manually here. So we're going to stick with the same kind of Google test, and we're going to do a search. So the Google test is going to be on google.com. So I've created this test, and like this system that I built uses Casper and Phantom and all these tools in the backend. So what's happening right now is it's firing up Phantom. It's going out. You can see it says everything's passed because I don't have any test steps yet, and it's taking the screenshot here. And it knows that there's nothing to compare it to, so 0% change, right? So we need to add some test steps. I'm going to come in here and edit the test. There's a bunch of options up here that I won't get into. The only thing I'm going to do, I'll get into this later, I guess I should say. The only thing I'm going to do is do the screenshot threshold. So I kind of mentioned this, setting a percentage of like what I consider to be alarming that I want to look at. And let's add some operations. So I want to do a search. So I'm going to assign the value ghost to this input box. So I happen to just know that it's called Q. That was in my other example, right? So I'm assigning the string Q. Let's add another operation. And now I need to submit the form, right? So I'm going to key press enter over here, and I'm going to just press enter on that same input. Really simple, right? Now I want to make an assertion. So I'm searching for ghost. So what I want to do is I want to look at the first result and make sure that it has ghost in it. So I'm going to say element contains text, ghost. So these are pretty familiar concepts, right? Typing something in, hitting enter, clicking, just really the fundamental things that you use in building a browser test, but it wraps it in a nice GUI. So assigning test, hitting enter, looking, I just happen to know this is L1H3. That's what those results are. So we'll save this and we'll execute the test. So what's happening now in the back end, it's firing up Casper and Phantom and doing these things. It's actually going to do a diff on the images, so you guys can see that happening. And it's nice because it's really, really fast. Most of the time it takes is actually in uploading the images to S3 because they're kind of big. So you can see it's come back. My test is passed. Assign ghost, hit enter, did the assertion here, and here's my screenshots, right? So here's the results, and here's this diff, which isn't very useful in this example. But you can see it did the overlay, and over here, this is really the only thing that stayed the same, this sign in button. So that's fine. But like I said, like you have to know something about your site for this to work, right? But so I know that this results screenshot is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say mark screenshot as passed, and I'm good to go, right? So really basically that's how I set up a test. And that's handy for some of these companies to come in and what did that take? 3 minutes. They have something running. So that's handy to them. Let's take a look at what happens when we break a test. Really quickly, somebody asked, what is L1H3? So these are CSS selectors. So generally when you write tests, usually in Selenium or anything, you usually either use CSS or XPath. Sometimes there's some other methods. But what this is doing is this is a list element, and H3 is sort of a header. So this is the HTML tags, HTML hierarchy. I'm going to change this to XXX just to break the test for a second, and we'll run it. I don't have XPath in there yet. It's all CSS based right now, but you can throw these things in there, really quickly. So all right, the test is done. It's failed as expected. It can't find XXX. The text not contained. So that's really sort of at a very fundamental level how this system works. So it's basically trying to take a lot of the principles I just showed, or the concepts at least, and wrap them in this hosted service with a GUI so that people who don't have that expertise can get started with it. I'm going to show you now, actually, you know what, let me show you some of these options. A couple options in here. I've built in a Selenium format download. So if you want to now take this test and run it somewhere else, you can download it, and here's what you get. If you've ever used Selenium IDE, it outputs it in this table format. So you get these commands over here, typing it in, key press, etc. So that's handy if you want to take your test somewhere else. And in these options here, you can change the start URL, HTTP authentication. A lot of these companies that I've worked with, they don't have a really mature deployment system, you know, and a continuous integration system to tie into, right? So what they want to do is they want to run these tests on a schedule. So there's an API for tying into this and running these tests like on demand. But some of these companies are like, I want to run this daily on my site. I want to run this hourly to make sure the login works or the shopping cart works, either, you know, on their live site or on their staging site. And here is the screenshot analysis, which I mentioned. I can turn this on or off, and I can set a threshold. I can be like, if this changes by, you know, maybe I have a really dynamic site. If this changes by 40%, I want to know. Or maybe I don't expect anything to change. If it just changes just a little bit, I want to know. And there's email notifications for that. So I'll skip back out here quickly, and I'll show you guys the recorder tool. So it's this Chrome extension here. It's free. You can install it. I hope you guys can see this. There's this little ghost button up here that it gives me on my toolbar. So let's go ahead and record a test. This is the homepage of Voxy.com. They're a language learning startup in New York. They're really awesome. I'm actually in their office right now doing this presentation. And they have this personalization process that you sign up, where you go through and you select some preferences and so on. So I want to build a test to make sure that's working. It's a pretty dynamic JavaScript-y thing. So here's how I do that. I come up here and I start this, excuse me, I start this extension, and I just start recording. So you can see this icon is green now. Unlike Selenium IDE, you don't get like a big box. It's just kind of behind the scenes recording what I do. So I'm gonna come in here and personalize my 7-day free trial. I get a modal. I'm gonna have to close that. That'll be part of the test. I need to select my proficiency. I'll choose intermediate. Go next. Some sort of preferences here. I'll go travel abroad. Go next. Some more interest, technology. I'll go next. And now I'm here, right? So it's building my course, and it's got my sign up for me to log in or create an account. So I'm going to stop my test here, just on those steps. And I'm going to make an assertion to make sure they've worked and that my preferences have stuck. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to stop the recording mode and make an assertion. And I get this sort of, I don't know if you guys can see this, but this kind of a crosshair that's highlighting things. So I want to assert that this technology element is there and has technology in it. Since I selected that, it would make sense that that should be showing up. So let's click it, records my assertion. Now I'm done, right? So I'll say I'm done with my assertions. I'll call this test Voxy, and I'll save it. And I immediately get a link online. So already it's taken my operations, my assertion, it's synced it to Ghost Inspector, and Casper is already fired up, and it's running through these test steps. So it's going to Voxy.com, retracing my steps. It's going to come back with the steps and with a screenshot of what I did. So you can see it's done that now. It's got my test steps down here. Here's my assertion where the text, that element contains technology. And over here is my screenshot, which is pretty much exactly what I had in my browser. Now, one important thing to note is that this recorder is really meant as a jumping off point. You can see these CSS paths here. I mentioned it uses CSS for meshing the elements. These are pretty gnarly, right? Like, it records everything. And that makes for a very specific but very brittle test. If you've done a lot of testing, you've probably realized that these change sometimes. So the idea is that I throw everything in here, and then it's really up to you to simplify this down. If you're writing tests, I've done that before. You should be somewhat kind of familiar with how these selectors work, so you can perform action. So I can come in here based on what I know about this site and say, okay, I just want to match this anchor tag, and here I know that I can just do, this modal footer, and I can just do a.button. So I hope I'm not getting too developer on you guys, but the idea is that you really want your test to be durable, and the recorder doesn't know anything about your test. So it records everything, and then it's really your job to come in and simplify this down to make something that's sustainable. And the idea would be with this interface that if something on the site changes, a developer changes the class name or the hierarchy, you can come in here and tweak this stuff pretty easily. I'm trying to kind of work on a page object type setup where you can move these paths into, you can kind of abstract them into objects. So we might call this one homepage personalized button. And then I can use it across multiple tests and just have that code in one spot. So if something changes, I just change it in one spot. And obviously old test results are down here, so I can come back anytime and look at what broke and so on. So that's Ghost Inspector. That's about all I have to cover. It's kind of like my pet project a little bit at this point still, but I'd love for you guys to, if you're interested, give it a shot. Good feedback, bad feedback. It's live at ghostinspector.com, and there's a free tier. So you get a couple of tests, and if this interests you and you imagine this might fit in your workflow, feel free to log in there and give it a shot, and give me any feedback you have. So that's part 2. Here's my information. Again, my name is Justin Klemm. There's my Google, my Twitter, my Gmail, and Ghost Inspector. So again, any questions at this point about Ghost Inspector or going back to PhantomJS stuff or CasperJS stuff, happy to answer any of those. You can shout them out or type them in or ping me on Twitter later. Any of that will work. I see there's just one question here. Can Ghost Inspector work outside of the browser? In terms of if you mean the recorder, that's a Chrome extension, so it's really meant to be used inside Chrome when you're browsing around. And the service, the sort of test runner, is hosted. So that's really sort of you don't actually deal with any of that. You get the GUI to manage your test. So yeah, pretty much it's in the browser. And the idea would be that you either hook into it with your system or you'd run it on a set schedule to test your stuff. So that's all I've got. I'll wait it out for a couple minutes. Mona, if you have anything to add, go for it. And thank you all very much for joining.
Thanks, Justin. I think we are good unless people have questions. We can close it.
Sure, yeah. If anybody has questions, feel free to unmute and just say it. I'm cool with that.
But thanks a lot, Justin. It was very informative, and thanks for sharing your Ghost Inspector with us.
You're welcome. Thank you guys very much for joining. Just a note for anybody who's still on, I'll post the URL to these slides if you want any of those packages or anything, want to check them out.
Okay, Justin, I think we should close out, and please share your slides and all the info, even on the Meetup site. So if people, and also the recording that you have done right now.